all the time.
We are family.
Outstanding effort again.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
That's big time.
Minus 15.
Respect all, fear none.
Oh, did he belt that one?
Intensity is not a perfume.
It was a no-doubter.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome into MASN All Access, presented by the Maryland Lottery, celebrating 50 years of fun and games. Amy Jennings and Brendan Mortensen here with your Maryland Lottery Top 50 Orioles Countdown. And we've been bringing you these Top 50 rankings bit by bit over the last few weeks, even months really. And Brendan, we finally made it to the top 10 with players 6 through 10 today.
Yeah, it is crunch time. We've got 2 shows left here breaking down the Orioles' top 50 players in the organization. We've got 10 through 6 today, and then 5 through 1 for our final show. Look, the Orioles are loaded. Best team in the American League record-wise right now. A lot of good players that are going to come in on this list. 10 through 6 that didn't even crack our top 5. That's just how deep this roster is right now.
Yeah, not super easy to rank here, but we did our best in here. Let's give the people what they want, Brendan. Here are players 6 through 10 and our rankings of the top 50 players in this system. And I think we have to start with number 6, Kyle Bradish, who leads this list. And, you know, going into the season, the Orioles weren't really sure who was going to step up into that number 1 role in their rotation. And Kyle Bradish has shown that he has the stuff of an ace at times. He can give the Orioles the depth of the ace at times. And really over the last month or so, he's had the dominance of an ace as well.
Yeah, we saw it in bits and pieces in 2022, right? We saw Kyle Bradish have flashes. We saw the game at the end of the year against the Astros that you went 8 innings, 10 Ks, and you went, wow, this guy has a lot of potential. And this season, the biggest thing that you wanted to see from Bradish was more consistency. I don't know if anybody really expected Kyle Bradish to have the 3rd best ERA in the American League, but that's what he has on the season because he's been more consistent. The strikeout numbers have still been very good. It's not an overwhelming number at just over 8.5 on the season, but Kyle Bradish has just been consistently excellent every 5 days. And as you said, really filled into that Orioles number 1 starter spot, which they've really needed this year.
The other starter on this list at number 10 is, of course, John Means, the guy who was the Orioles ace before he had to have Tommy John surgery. What do we know about his progress in his latest rehab outings?
Yeah, his rehab assignment has now wrapped up. Just had a start in AAA Norfolk on Wednesday, went 5 innings. He has now gone 2 straight starts, tossing 5 innings, just 3 total earned runs over those 2 starts. So John Means he doesn't need to be brought up and added to the active roster right away. He's probably not going to be available to pitch until sometime next week anyway. But it's looking like next week could be the timetable for a John Means return. Still kind of remains to be seen what his role will be in Baltimore, whether they start him out in the starting rotation. We know Cole Irvin is back in the bullpen now. Does John Means take over as the number 6 starter in the rotation, or do they ease him back into things? Do they start him in the bullpen in kind of a long relief role, get 2 or 3 innings here and there before putting him back in the starting rotation? So we'll see what happens with John Means, but even without pitching much this year, we know the kind of talent that John Means is. We know the ceiling that he has.
And then at number 8, we have the other pitcher on this list, and that's Yennier Cano. And before we get into the fact that, you know, the Orioles got him back in the Jorge Lopez trade, and now Jorge Lopez is back in this bullpen, let's start with Cano. And tell me what clicked for Cano this year that, you know, gave him the ability to be so dominant for a good part of this season.
Yeah, well, it really comes down to the sinker being a dominant pitch and then being able to use the slider more effectively off of that. Last season, Cano had an ERA over 10 in the big leagues, and right now he's got a 1.65 ERA, was an all-star this year. He's been ridiculous. He somehow was able to almost eliminate walks from his game. He was walking a ton of batters last season, has been able to keep the ball in the strike zone, and he just looks different too. He has a moxie on the mound. We know the stare down after the strikeouts. So being able to use the sinker and the slider more effectively, put them in the zone more frequently, where they're not just complete waste pitches on, say, an 0-2 count. The slider is competitive in that count, right? He's able to use those pitches a lot better. Cano just able to put a lot of things together, similar to what Felix Bautista was able to do when he came up to the majors. similar kind of pitchers there with just elite stuff, and it's able to click with this coaching staff.
You mentioned Felix Bautista there, who the Orioles, of course, lost, but Cano has stepped up in his place, and now they have Jorge Lopez back in this bullpen as well. How do you feel about where the Orioles bullpen is right now?
Miraculously pretty good, to be honest. I mean, it's not often that you can lose the best reliever in baseball and still feel pretty good about where your bullpen is. But Matt Bonaparte and I were talking about it on the Bird's Nest this week. You've got Jorge Lopez as an addition to this bullpen, claimed by the Orioles from Miami. He's not going to be postseason eligible, but will still help the Orioles down the stretch. You add DL Hall as well into that bullpen. We know the kind of stuff that DL Hall has. But getting Lopez back is huge because you lose your all-star closer from 2023 and you get your all-star closer from a year ago for nothing. So pretty nice to add Jorge Lopez to this bullpen. Even if he's not playoff eligible, he's still going to help this team down the stretch.
And then moving to the position players on this list, we have Austin Hayes and Ryan Mountcastle. Starting with Ryan Mountcastle, who's hitting .357 since his return in July with a .969 OPS. What have you seen from Ryan Mountcastle over the last 2 months?
Yeah, I mean, he's been ridiculously good. It's a combination of a few things, I think, for Mountcastle. The first one being he's toned down the aggressiveness a little bit. We know that Ryan Mountcastle is a really free swinger, and that's great. You don't want to completely eliminate the aggressiveness at the plate. That's part of what makes him so good is maybe, on the first pitch of an at-bat, he can still attack a fastball and get a hit there. But he's toned it back a little bit. We've seen the walk numbers really go up for Mountcastle. The on-base percentage has been excellent. You mentioned the batting average since returning in July. The on-base percentage is just under .430. And we're not used to that with Ryan Mountcastle. He has not typically been a guy who takes a lot of walks, but the OPS on the season is back up to 800. The on-base percentage has been great, and his actual numbers have gotten a lot closer to his expected numbers. We saw last year Ryan Mountcastle got really unlucky. We know that part of it is just being a right-handed power hitter at Camden Yards. It's a hard thing to do with how the left field wall is currently constructed, but the actual numbers for Mountcastle, the bad luck has faded a little bit.
And Brendan, you had the chance to catch up with Sig Mejdal and have a conversation about those expected numbers being much closer to his actual numbers this year than last. Let's hear that conversation that you had with Sig just a few days ago.
Last year, we heard a lot of the expected stats surrounding somebody like Ryan Mountcastle, who hit the ball really hard a lot of times. And, sometimes it just seemed like he was getting really unlucky. It seemed like it was going right at defenders. When somebody's expected batting average is a lot higher than their actual batting average, or same thing with slugging percentage, their expected slugging percentage is a lot higher than their slugging percentage. Does that tell you that maybe a hitter is just getting unlucky?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, it depends on the confidence you have in the model, but let's say you have that confidence in the model. There's no reason last season, as you brought up, like Ryan Mountcastle should continue to have that bad luck. The outfielders were making amazing plays. He was hitting the ball this distance in seemingly the wrong ballparks.
Right.
And so, no, that's not going to continue. And I think this year his expecteds and his actuals are definitely within arm's distance.
So if I'm a fan and I hear that, my favorite player has an expected batting average that's a lot higher than his actual batting average, why should I care about that? What does it tell me about that player?
Yeah, well, you can't go back in the past and distribute his batted balls without bad luck. So It's not going to help you for what has already happened. But going forward, he's a bit better of a player than the actual numbers would expect. And so you would expect this player who maybe is frustrating you a little bit to be a bit better.
And maybe we'll see a year like Ryan Mountcastle is having this year where his numbers get a little bit closer to those expected numbers.
Exactly.
Well, Sig Mejdal, we're going to keep an eye out for some of those expected numbers. And if we hear them on the broadcast, we'll have a little better idea of what that means. Sig, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Maryland Lottery celebrating its 50th year, and each game a Maryland Lottery Fast Play Home Run Riches contestant of the game is selected. The contestant of the game wins $500 from the Maryland Lottery just for being selected. then an additional $500 for each Orioles home run that game. And to commemorate the Maryland Lottery's 50th anniversary, the contestant of the game when the Orioles hit their 50th home run of this season won $50,000. And a second $50,000 will be awarded to someone who enters the contest in a special drawing to be held in August. For a chance to be selected as a Fast Play Home Run Riches contestant of the game, enter Fast Play Home Run Riches game tickets into Maryland Lottery rewards. Visit marylandlottery.com/homerun for details. And Brendan, we mentioned Austin Hayes earlier. You still ranked him above Ryan Mountcastle despite Ryan Mountcastle's numbers over the last 2 months. How come?
Yeah, I mean, it's close. I think it's really a toss-up. It's a matter of, are you looking at the first few months of the season or the last 2 or so months of the season? Because the first few months of the season, Austin Hayes was competing for a batting title in the American League. He's still hitting close to 290 on the year, has struggled a little bit kind of during the stretch that Ryan Mountcastle has really thrived. So Mountcastle certainly closing that gap in the ranking between Mountcastle and Hayes. But in the end, you still give the edge to the guy who made the All-Star team this year, which is why I went with Austin Hayes. And when you're looking at defensive value, Ryan Mountcastle is a good defensive first baseman, which is valuable, but it is far less valuable than the defense that Austin Hayes gives you in left field. And left field is in quotation marks there because he's playing left field at Camden Yards most of the time, which is essentially just playing center field again. So Austin Hayes, even though the bat has struggled a little bit over the last few months, defensively still gives you a ton of value.
Well, there you have it. Orioles 6 through 10 in our top 50 rankings. Later this month, we're going to have 1 through 5, Brendan, so you got to stay on your toes for that. But in the meantime, you can follow our coverage on MASNsports.com. The Orioles are playing exciting baseball. And, of course, on Wednesdays, Brendan and Matt Bonaparte have the Bird's Nest Show. They're live at 11 every Wednesday, so make sure you tune into that. A big thank you to Matt Bonaparte for producing the show. For Brendan, I'm Amy, and this has been MASN All Access, presented by the Maryland Lottery.